Commissioner had worked for the Galactic Armistice Commission for 40 cycles. In all that time, she had never found a number that refused to make sense. Numbers were her life. They were clean and honest. They did not lie or hide or pretend to be something they were not. This was why she had chosen this work, and why her species, were so valued in positions that required careful counting and cold logic. They did not feel things the way other species did. They observed, they recorded, they analyzed. Emotions were distant things to them, like stars seen from very far away, had always considered this a gift. It let her see patterns that others missed because they were too busy feeling. But today, sitting in her small office aboard the Commission's orbital station, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt confused. She felt almost worried. And underneath those feelings, growing stronger by the minute, she felt curious. The anomaly had appeared in her data 3 days ago. She had been working on the Century Report, a massive document that tracked every major conflict resolution across all 17 spiral arms of the galaxy. It was boring work, but important. The Commission needed to know which species were helping to keep the peace and which were causing problems. They needed to understand the patterns of war and the patterns of peace. Had been counting successful mediations by species when she noticed something strange. One species had numbers that did not fit. They were too high, much too high. Humans. She had checked the data 3 times, then 4, then 5. She had called up the original records and traced each entry back to its source. There was no mistake. In just 60 standard years since their admission to the galactic community, humans had been directly involved in ending 47 major conflicts. They had also helped resolve over 200 minor territorial disputes. These were not small numbers. These were impossible numbers. The ancient hegemony had been mediating conflicts for 12,000 years. They had ended 39 major wars in the last century. The Pale Nebula, with their ability to read thoughts and feelings, had managed 22. The Commission itself, with all its resources and experience, had officially mediated 18. Humans had beaten them all, in 60 years, with no special powers and no ancient wisdom, with nothing but their strange, short-lived, impossibly stubborn selves. Pulled up individual case files. She needed to understand how this had happened. The first file was called The Incident. It had taken place 18 years ago, near the border between crystalline collective space and the territory of the Vapor Lords. These two species had been fighting for 300 years over a string of asteroid mining stations. The war had killed millions. Every attempt at peace had failed. Then a human cargo captain named had arrived. He was not a diplomat. He was not a soldier. He was just a man who flew a ship and carried goods from one place to another. His ship had broken down near the disputed zone, and while waiting for repairs, he had somehow ended up drinking with delegations from both sides. The records were unclear about how this had happened. What was clear was that by the end of the night had gotten both delegations so drunk that they had started singing together. By morning, they had signed a preliminary peace agreement. By the end of the week, the 300-year war was over. The official report called it unconventional diplomacy, called it madness. She opened another file, the Siege of Hollow Moon. This conflict had trapped 2 armies on a barren moon for 18 months. Neither side could retreat without losing face. Neither could advance without being destroyed. They had simply sat there, starving and waiting, while their governments argued and refused to back down. A human Marine private named Sarah had ended it. She had not been ordered to do anything. She had simply walked out into the no-man's land between the 2 armies and started cooking. She had built a fire and begun preparing something the report called barbecue. The smell had carried across the dead moon's thin atmosphere. Within an hour, soldiers from both sides had come to investigate. By the time ran out of food, they were sharing rations and exchanging stories about their families. The peace treaty was signed the next day. Sarah received a medal and a formal reprimand for breaking protocol. She reportedly said she did not care about either one. Move to the next file, then the next, then the next. A human diplomat who ended the 1,000-year grudge between thee and the by asking why they were fighting. Neither side could remember. They had been at war for so long that the original cause had been forgotten. The human had simply pointed this out, and both species had been too embarrassed to continue. A human teacher who stopped a genocide by showing both sides pictures of their children and asking if this was the future they wanted to build for them. A human musician who played a song, so sad that 2 warring fleets stopped firing and asked her to play it again. The patterns were there, but they made no sense. These were not trained negotiators using proven techniques. These were random people doing random things that somehow worked. It was as if humans had stumbled into a secret that the rest of the galaxy had missed for thousands of years. Saved her findings and requested a meeting with the senior council. As she waited for their response, she kept reading. She could not stop. Each file was more impossible than the last, and yet each one was documented, and the humans had done these things. The question was how. The council agreed to see her the next morning. She spent the night preparing her presentation, organizing the data into charts and graphs that even the most skeptical council member would have to accept. But as she worked, she realized that the numbers alone would not be enough. The council would want to know why. They would want an explanation. Did not have one, not yet. She thought about the humans she had met over the years. They were strange creatures, short-lived compared to most species with of less than a century, fragile bodies with no natural weapons or defenses, no telepathy, no precognition, no ability to phase through matter or survive in vacuum. By every measure, they should have been one of the weaker species in the galaxy. And yet, she remembered a human ambassador she had spoken with years ago. He had been old for his species, with white hair and wrinkled skin. She had asked him how humans had survived so long with such obvious limitations. He had laughed and said something she had not understood at the time. "We are really good at making friends," he had told her, "and we are really bad at giving up." She had thought he was joking. Now she wondered if he had been telling her the truth. The next morning, stood before the senior council and presented her findings. She showed them the numbers and watched their faces change from skepticism to surprise to something that might have been alarm. She walked them through the case files, one by one, and saw them struggle to understand what they were hearing. When she finished, the first commissioner spoke. He was an ancient creature, older than most star systems, and he had seen more than anyone should have to see. "What are you recommending?" he asked. Had thought about this question all night. The answer still felt strange to say out loud, but she said it anyway. "I recommend that I be sent to Earth to observe humans directly. We need to understand what they are doing and how they are doing it. Whatever this is, it could change everything we know about conflict resolution." The council voted unanimously in favor. 3 days later, boarded a ship bound for a small blue planet on the outer edge of the Orion Arm. She did not know what she would find there, but she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she needed to find it. The journey took 2 weeks. She spent the time reading everything she could find about humanity. Their history was violent and chaotic. They had spent most of their existence fighting each other. Wars upon wars upon wars, stretching back to the very beginning of their civilization. It should have made them monsters. Instead, somehow, it seemed to have made them something else entirely. Stared out the window of her ship as Earth grew larger in the distance. It looked peaceful from space, small and blue and fragile. She wondered what secrets it held. She was about to find out. The first thing noticed about Earth was the noise. Everywhere she went, humans were talking. They talked to each other. They talked to strangers. They talked to themselves. They seemed physically incapable of silence. At first, it was overwhelming. By the end of her first week, she had grown used to it. By the end of her first month, she found herself almost missing it when she was alone. She had been assigned a human guide, a young woman named who worked for the Earth Diplomatic Corps, was patient and kind and answered every question asked, no matter how strange. She never seemed to find this curiosity annoying. If anything, she seemed to enjoy it. "You ask good questions," told her one afternoon. They were sitting in a garden in a city called New Delhi, watching humans walk past. "Most aliens just assume they understand us. You actually want to know." "I do not understand you at all," admitted. "That is why I am here." Laughed. It was a sound it heard many times now, and she still found it fascinating. Humans laughed when they were happy, but also when they were nervous or embarrassed or sad. It seemed to mean 100 different things at once. "Good," said. "That is the first step to understanding anything." Over the next 3 months, visited every institution that might explain the human talent for peace. She attended their diplomatic academies and found them shockingly informal. Students argued with teachers. Teachers admitted when they did not know the answer. Everyone seemed more interested in asking questions than in memorizing rules. She observed their conflict resolution training and discovered that the primary focus was on something called empathy. This was the ability to imagine yourself in another person's position, to feel what they might be feeling. They had no word for this. It was not something her species did. "How do you teach this?" she asked one instructor. "How do you make someone feel what another person feels?" The instructor, an older man with kind eyes, smiled at her. "You cannot teach it exactly," he said. "You can only help people remember that they already know how. Everyone was a child once. Everyone knows what it feels like to be scared or lonely or confused. We just help them remember that the person across the table feels those things too." Wrote this down, but she did not fully understand it. The idea that understanding came from remembering rather than learning was foreign to her. Everything she knew had been taught. Everything important had been written in books. She interviewed human veterans who had served in galactic peacekeeping missions. Their stories every model of rational behavior she had ever studied. They spoke of sharing meals with enemies, of playing games with soldiers who had been trying to kill them the day before, of finding common ground in the strangest places. One veteran, a man named James, told her about a conflict on a planet called 442b. Two species had been fighting a blood feud for generations. The hatred was so deep that neither side could remember life without it. War was simply what they did. It was who they were. A human negotiator had been sent to attempt peace. She was young and inexperienced, and everyone expected her to fail. Instead, she had done something no one had tried before. She had asked both sides why they were fighting. "They did not know," James said. "They had been fighting for so long that the original cause was lost. They only knew that they were supposed to hate each other. That was all they had left." "What did the negotiator do?" asked. She asked them a question. She said, "If you cannot remember why you started, why not stop?" They did not have an answer, and that was the beginning of the end. The simplicity was almost offensive, too. Surely it could not be that easy. Surely centuries of sophisticated diplomatic theory could not be outperformed by a single obvious question. But the evidence said otherwise. She found another case that confused her even more. In the Andromeda Reach, a human trade delegation had prevented a genocide by inviting the would-be aggressors to something called a potluck dinner. This was an event where everyone brought food to share. The evening had somehow turned into a cooking competition, and by morning, the invasion fleet had dispersed. The admiral of the fleet had promised to return with a better casserole recipe. "I do not understand," told. "They were going to kill millions. How does food change that?" Thought about this for a moment. "It is hard to hate someone once you have eaten their cooking," she said. "Food is personal. When you share a meal with someone, you are trusting them. You are saying that you believe they will not hurt you. And when they share their food with you, they are saying the same thing." But the admiral had already decided to kill them. He had given the order. Yes, but orders can be changed. Minds can be changed. Humans believe that nothing is ever truly decided until it is done, and sometimes not even then. Consider this. In society, a decision made was a decision kept. To change your mind was a sign of weakness, of poor initial judgment, but humans seemed to see it differently. They saw change as a strength. They believed that people could always become better than they were. It was a strange way to think, but the more she observed, the more she realized that it was at the heart of everything humans did. The pattern eventually identified was this: humans did not approach war as a logical extension of policy. They approached it as a failure, a breakdown in communication between beings who, at their core, probably wanted the same things: safety, prosperity, recognition, someone to see them and understand them. But more than that, humans possessed a quality that struggled to name. They assumed connection. They walked into rooms full of ancient enemies and simply talked to them. As equals, as potential friends. They ignored the hierarchies of age and power that other species found sacred. They asked rude questions and made inappropriate jokes and somehow, impossibly, made sworn enemies laugh together. It was deeply undignified. It was statistically improbable. And it worked. In her final week on Earth, asked the question that had been forming in her mind for months. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. "These conflicts have nothing to do with you. These species are not your allies. You gain nothing from their peace. Why do you keep trying?" Was quiet for a long time. They were standing on a beach, watching the sun set over an ocean. The sky was turning colors that had no names for. "Because we know what war costs," finally said. "We have been fighting each other since we first learned how. Thousands of years of killing and dying and losing the people we love. We got very good at it, better than we want to admit." She turned to look at. Her eyes were wet, a sign of strong emotion in humans. "But we also learned how to stop, how to look at the people we were fighting and see ourselves in them. It took us a long time. We made a lot of mistakes. We are still making them. But we learned that the only way forward was together." She looked back at the sunset. "When we see other species going through what we went through, we cannot just walk away. We know how much it hurts, and we know it does not have to be that way. So we help, because no one should have to learn these lessons alone." Thought about this for a long time. The sun sank below the horizon. The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. She began to understand. She boarded her ship the next morning. As Earth grew smaller behind her, she began writing her report. It would take weeks to finish. It would change everything the Commission thought they knew about conflict resolution. But she already knew the conclusion she would reach. Humans were not better negotiators than other species. They were not smarter or more experienced or more sophisticated. They were simply unwilling to give up on the possibility that enemies could become friends. And that somehow made all the difference. The ceremony was held in the great amphitheater of the Commission's orbital station above Pax Centrum. It was the largest gathering place in the known galaxy, built 12,000 years ago to host the first meeting of species that would eventually become the Galactic Armistice Commission. The walls were carved with the names of every conflict that had been peacefully resolved since that day. There were millions of names, written in thousands of languages, covering every surface like a history of hope. Today, representatives from 900 species filled the seats. They had come from every corner of the galaxy, from ancient civilizations and young ones, from species that breathed methane and species that lived in the hearts of stars. They had come because the Commission had promised them something unprecedented: a formal citation honoring a single species for their contribution to galactic peace. In all 12,000 years, this had never been done before. Stood at the central podium, her report displayed on screens visible throughout the chamber. She had spent weeks preparing this presentation. She had checked every number, every case, anticipated every objection. She was as ready as she would ever be. The human delegation sat in a section of the gallery reserved for honored guests, had observed them as they arrived, and she had been struck by how unlike a diplomatic delegation they looked. There were formally dressed ambassadors, yes, but there were also soldiers in casual clothes, scientists with messy hair, and one individual who was fairly certain had simply been a tourist who wandered onto the wrong shuttle. When she had checked the credentials, she discovered that he had been given a seat anyway. The humans had simply said that he seemed nice, and they had an extra ticket. This was very human, she had realized. It was also, in a strange way, exactly the point. "Distinguished representatives," began. Her voice carried across the vast chamber, translated simultaneously into 900 languages. "I stand before you today to present findings that have challenged everything I thought I knew about conflict resolution. I ask only that you listen with open minds and allow the evidence to speak for itself." She began with the numbers. She showed them the statistics she had compiled over months of research. The 47 major conflicts resolved, the 200 minor disputes settled, the comparison to other species that made the human achievement seem impossible. The assembly murmured. Some representatives shifted in their seats. The delegation exchanged glances that suggested they thought there had been a mistake. Continued. She walked them through case after case. The cargo captain who had made peace through drinking songs, the marine who had ended a siege with barbecue, the diplomat who had asked an obvious question and embarrassed two species into stopping a 1,000-year war. By the 10th case, the murmuring had stopped. By the 20th, the chamber was completely silent. Representatives from species that had been fighting for were listening with expressions that looked almost like hope. When she reached the end of her presentation, paused. This was the moment she had been building toward, the conclusion that had seemed impossible when she had first discovered the anomaly, but now felt like the only truth that mattered. "The evidence is conclusive," she announced. "In 60 years of galactic membership, humanity has contributed to ending more armed conflicts than any other species in Commission history. They have done so without a unified strategy, often without official sanction, and frequently through methods that defy all established principles of conflict resolution." She looked down at her tablet, though she did not need to. She had memorized every word. "When I asked human representatives to explain their success, I received many different answers. They said they treated their opponents like people. They said that everyone is tired of fighting if you give them an excuse to stop. One individual told me that he did not know how he had helped end a war, only that he had brought snacks and talked about his children." The first commissioner leaned forward in his seat. He was ancient, even by the standards of long-lived species. He had seen more conflict and more peace than most beings could imagine. His face was unreadable. "Commissioner," he said, "what is your recommendation?" "My recommendation is that we formally recognize humanity with the Commission's highest honor, the citation for extraordinary contribution to galactic peace. It has never been given before. I believe it is time." The murmuring returned, louder now. Some representatives looked pleased, others looked confused. A few, particularly from species with long military traditions, looked almost angry. The citation would change the balance of prestige in the galaxy. It would elevate humans above species that had been mediating conflicts for thousands of years. "Before we vote," the first commissioner said, "I would like to hear from the human delegation. Would their representative please address the chamber?" There was movement in the human section. After a brief discussion that seemed to involve several people pointing at each other, a gray-haired woman stood up. She was older for a human, with deep lines around her eyes and a posture that suggested she had seen difficult things and survived them. Her name, according to the official records, was. She had served as a diplomat for 40 years. She walked to the secondary podium and looked out at the vast assembly. 900 species, thousands of representatives, millions of years of collective history watching her. She did not seem nervous. She seemed thoughtful. "I am not sure I am the right person to explain this," she said. "I am just one human. We are not very good at speaking for each other. We argue too much. We disagree about everything. Half the people in my delegation right now probably think I am going to say the wrong thing." A few laughs from the human section smiled. "But I will try to say something true." She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "We have been fighting each other for our entire history, thousands of years of war. We got very good at it, honestly, better than we wanted to be. There were times when we thought we might destroy ourselves completely. We came close, too close." She looked around the chamber. Her eyes moved from species to species, face to face, as if she was trying to see each one individually. "But we also got good at stopping, at looking at the other side and realizing that they were scared too, that they had families waiting for them, that the thing we were fighting over was not worth dying for or making someone else die for." She spread her hands in a gesture that seemed to include the entire chamber. "Every species we have met out here, you all have the same look in your eyes when the fighting has gone on long enough. You are tired. You want to go home. You just need someone to help you find the door." She smiled slightly. It was a warm expression, but sad too, as if she was remembering things she wished she could forget. "We are pretty good at doors." The chamber was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. Walked back to her seat. As she passed, she paused. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing us. Most species do not bother." Did not know what to say, so she simply nodded. The vote was held immediately. Representatives entered their decisions into the ancient voting system that had been used for 12,000 years. The results appeared on every screen in the chamber. Unanimous approval. For the first time in the history of the Galactic Armistice Commission, a species was being formally recognized for their contribution to peace, and that species was humanity. The human delegation erupted into noise. They were cheering and hugging, and some of them were crying. Even the tourist who had wandered onto the wrong shuttle was being embraced by ambassadors. It was chaotic and undignified and utterly human. Watched them celebrate. She thought about everything she had seen over the past months. The academies where students argued with teachers, the veterans who shared meals with former enemies, the diplomat who had asked an obvious question. She added a final note to her report. It was not strictly necessary. It would not change any of the conclusions she had already reached, but it felt important to say. Further study recommended. Method appears to be contagious. As she watched, one of the human diplomats broke away from the celebration and approached a group of representatives. The had looked unhappy about the citation. They had been the galaxy's leading mediators for. Being surpassed by a young species in 60 years must have been difficult to accept. The human said something that could not hear. One of them responded stiffly. There was a moment of tension. Then the human laughed and said something else. A few seconds later, they were laughing too. Within 5 minutes, humans were exchanging contact information and making plans to visit each other's worlds. Watch this happen with something that might have been wonder. Her species did not feel things the way others did. Emotions were distant to her, like stars seen from very far away. But in that moment, watching ancient divisions dissolve in the face of simple kindness, she thought she understood why humans did what they did, why they kept trying even when logic said to stop, why they believed that enemies could become friends. It was not complicated. It was not sophisticated. It was simply this. Humans believed that every being deserved a chance. They believed that the universe was better when people worked together than when they fought apart. They believed these things so deeply that they acted on them even when it seemed foolish. And somehow, impossibly, that faith kept being rewarded. The celebration continued around her. Humans were now talking to representatives from a dozen different species, making connections that would lead to friendships, that would lead to alliances, that would lead to peace. Closed her report and allowed herself to simply observe. There would be more conflicts. There would always be more conflicts. Beings would disagree and fight and hurt each other as they had done since the beginning of time. But there would also be humans. Strange, loud, stubborn humans who refused to believe that war was inevitable, who saw enemies and imagined friends, who walked into impossible situations and somehow found doors that no one else could see. The galaxy was changing. It had been changing since the day humans had arrived, and for the first time in her long career, found herself looking forward to what came next. She did not know what the future would hold, but she was beginning to believe it might be good.